Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This is the Duel Part 2. I was hoping to reach him before he issued the challenge, the Baron murmured, his voice heavy with disappointment. Let me know how it ends, but I fear my son has bitten off more than he can chew this time. He sighed. And I, he shook his head. I dare not intervene. Ollie couldn't argue with that. Of course, my lord, he agreed. There was a momentary wait as the Baron's hand descended onto the innkeeper's shoulder. Then the night air intruded briefly into the inn's warmth, and the Baron was gone. Ollie looked toward the competitors in time to hear Rockwell echo his reply to the Baron. Of course, the young man agreed. That would be wise. The stranger bowed his head once more, his thin smile mocking. Of course, most wise, he agreed in a mimicry of the lordling's reply. Your prize will be the maiden and my service until you see fit to release me, not to mention a large amount of gold. How much gold? Rockwell asked. The stranger glanced around at their breath-taken audience. When he replied, his voice was low. I wouldn't disclose the amount here if I were wise, he said. But this should give you an idea. He took a slip of paper from his pocket and passed it, blank side up and folded, across the table. Rockwell took it, turned it briefly, and paled before slipping it into a pocket of his own. Agreed, he answered from a throat gone suddenly dry. And what will your master take should you be victorious? My master's prize. The stranger paused, leaning back and arching his hands against each other as the mocking smile returned. My master's prize, he continued, will be the maiden's freedom and your service until he sees fit to release you. Rockwell paused, aware of a new intensity in the tavern's silence. Realization of the enormity of what he might lose touched his expression, and the first hint of doubt wrinkled his brow. Sounds fair to me, Rockwell, came a rough voice from the bar. This was followed by such a chorus of agreement that Rockwell finally bowed his head. I agree, he murmured. Did you say something, Rockwell? The barfly's voice grew louder with taunt. Rockwell looked up, scowling, and the stranger followed his gaze. It was met by that of a tall man with flame-red hair and a blacksmith's physique. The lordling answered with uneasy silence. Well? The redhead prodded. A low murmur came from his supporters, and Rockwell swallowed. I I said I agree to the conditions of the duel. Rockwell's voice was a degree off tremoring. The redhead looked at those around him before raising his tankard to the stranger. You heard the lad, stranger, he said. I think you can begin. There is one more thing, the stranger spat, and this time he did not smile as he raised his voice. I call for this duel to be witnessed as just and fair, and its conditions binding. Hear, hear, the redhead returned, his rowdy agreement echoed by a more subdued mutter of assent from the regulars at the bar. While no blood was to be drawn, the cost of losing was high. More than one mind had to be turning to what the Baron might think or do should his son lose this fight. Now we may begin, the stranger said. The redhead's only reply was a grunt as he beckoned to Ollie for a refill. After you, Rockwell prompted. The stranger turned to face the young lord and reached into his vest pocket. Rockwell watched as he withdrew a golden hourglass and stood it on the table. You did not think we'd have forever to ponder each riddle? He asked. We will have only until the glass needs turning. He flipped the hourglass so that the sand began to run. This long, he said, as they watched the sands trickle downward, and no longer. Agreed? It is an amendment to the rules, Rockwell muttered. Aye, but a fair one. The redhead had made his way from the bar and now drew a seat up beside them. When Rockwell did not immediately agree, he raised his voice to the crowd. Is it fair, do you think? Once more a rumble of assent crept around the tavern, this one more reluctant than the last. And should it be part of the duel's conditions and observed? Again, the murmured answer was yes. Rockwell bowed his head. Then I agree, he said. You may begin, stranger. Very well, the stranger replied. Of what do I speak? Unwielded daggers line the lanes, offering sweetness, yet giving pain. Rockwell stared at him blankly as the stranger turned the hourglass to signal the start. With an effort, he tore his gaze from the fall of sparkling dust and thought on the riddle. It wasn't a hard question, and a smile slowly formed as the answer dawned. Ha! An easy task, stranger. Berry thorns. Now of what do I speak? It opens paths often closed, is earned, not bought, yet is often sold. It closes eyes and opens doors, is prized by the rich and by the poor. The stranger's eyes narrowed as he thought. Then he relaxed as the answer came. Gold. Now, of what do I speak? Cuts like a knife, stings like a whip, can soothe like honey, or let poison drip. Rockwell's brow wrinkled with concentration. The crowd waited. The hourglass ran almost dry. Answer me, the stranger said, and riddle again. Rockwell looked desperate. His mouth was dry and he took a sip of his ale. The answer dawned as he licked his lips and he set his mug firmly on the table before him. The tongue! He shouted, and the tavern relaxed. The riddle, pressed the stranger, and Rockwell leapt into the first verse that came to mind. Announces daytime, scatters night, made soft by clouds, celestial light. There was a groan of disappointment from those around them, and the stranger didn't blink. The sun, he purred. Now answer me this, and give your answer in riddle form. Most certainly lives, yet loves not life. It shines so bright, but is swamp dark inside. The hourglass trickled empty without an answer, and Rockwell's face grew slick with sweat. The stranger turned the hourglass, giving the young lord hope until it emptied, and the answer had still not come. Rockwell stared at the glass in desperation, but this time the stranger's hands remained still, and the hourglass unturned. Well, the stranger pressed, give me the answer in riddle form, or concede the victory. The tavern seemed occupied by statues. One heart beat past, then two, then three. On the third, Rockwell bowed his head and rose to his feet. His hand dropped to the hilt of his sword. The stranger watched, no concern marring his features. Rockwell glanced around the tavern for support, but no one would meet his eye. When his gaze fell on one of his father's men and recognized the captain's crest on his jerkin, his face lit with brief hope. The hope faded when the man shook his head. Live with honor, the redhead murmured, half challenging, half taunting, from beside him. And Rockwell turned back to the stranger and laid his blade, hilt first, on the table. Drawing a deep, quavering breath, he knelt before the man he had sought to fight. Your wish, my lord, he said. The stranger looked around at the men at the bar, seeking any who would challenge his victory. Those who had returned to watching him were quiet and turned from his gaze to study the table or ale before them. Very gently, the stranger pushed the sword toward his master's newest servant. It's time we left, he said. We've a league or two to go tonight. Rockwell nodded. Rising from his knees, he sheathed his sword and, looking neither right nor left, followed the stranger from the inn. He noticed, too, that the guard captain was gone, and wondered how much his father had known. They travelled into the night, keeping a brisk pace until the mist started to rise from the valley floor. The stranger led Rockwell over a brief rise leading down from the village's small plateau, and the young baron found himself remembering the last time he had taken this path. He also blushingly recalled the words he'd spoken to an outlands maiden there, not 2 months gone. It was with growing trepidation that he followed the stranger further into the valley and along a faint path winding through a stand of willows. And it was with sudden, undeniable fear that he halted, not 3 steps after passing through that sorrowful gathering of trees, his jaw hanging in terrified surprise at the sight before him. The stranger, walking ahead, turned and came back for him, but Rockwell did not notice. He was too busy staring at the beast crouched silently on the other side of the willow glade. It was gold or silver, or gold so pure that it shone white in the moonlight, making the mist form a halo around its body. Its green eyes blazed emerald bright, and its teeth gleamed like pearls. Rockwell stared at them through the steam of the creature's breath, and his knees buckled in fear. The stranger's hand on his arm caught and lifted him to his feet. Rockwell, the stranger's voice held a compelling quality. It made the baronet look away from the dragon and toward his master's servant. I wasn't entirely honest with you back at the tavern, the man admitted. Rockwell managed to close his mouth and nod, in spite of his gaze straying back to the creature waiting not 20 steps away. Rockwell, the stranger's voice captured his attention again, and again the young lord looked at the man's face. I have no master. Then I'm free? It was a ridiculous question, but Rockwell's eyes were already sliding back toward the dragon. No, the stranger told him, then explained. I serve myself. I am my own master and your new lord. Rockwell turned his gaze back to the stranger. Then I will serve you, he said, his voice vague as the dragon captured his attention once more. Rockwell, the stranger's voice beckoned him once more, its tone ordering him to return his gaze to his new master's face. Rockwell obeyed and found himself staring into green eyes that sparkled with amusement and a little anger. I have someone very important for you to meet. Yes, master? Very gently, the stranger turned him to face the dragon. It was no longer there. In its place stood a young woman, Alyssa, the Outlands maiden who had rejected his proposal a month before, the girl he had hounded mercilessly whenever he could create the time. Rockwell stared at her, trying to equate her gentle face, solemn green eyes, and white blonde hair with the savage, snake-like grace of the beast she'd been before. His knees buckled in spite of the stranger's grip on his arm, and he sank to the dewy grass. Oh, sweet mother of light, he whispered, bowing his head in fear and shame. Rockwell, the stranger's voice was softly insistent, repeating the lordling's name when he didn't respond. Rockwell. The baronet lifted his face. His master loomed over him, one hand on his shoulder, the other indicating Alyssa as she began to walk toward them. Rockwell, I'd like you to meet my mate.